WOIConversations is where academia and industry meet to discuss open innovation.
Ideas, insights, best practices, and diverse perspectives.
For academics, practitioners, policymakers, and open innovation enthusiasts. A video session, a podcast, and a good time to share and learn together.
My name is Marisol Menendez.
And my name is Marcel Bogers.
And we wait for you every month in a new chapter of World Open Innovation Conversations.
Hello everyone, my name is Marcel Bogers and I'm a professor of open and collaborative innovation at Eindhoven University of Technology.
And I'm Marisol Menendez, and I'm an open innovation practitioner since 2012, and open innovation is my passion. We welcome you to our third session of World Open Innovation Conversations. For those who are listening to us for the first time, let me tell you about a little bit about us. World Open Innovation Conversations is an initiative that we just began. This is our third chapter. And we gather the best people that around. We gather all the best practitioners in academia because we want to bring together to create a bridge and get academia and industry and practice together. Of course, we aim high, so we are bringing the top high-quality leaders in the areas that we are discussing each time. So we invite leaders from the academia sector, and of course we also bring in friends because we are trying to create close conversations. We want to feel that we were together in a room and chatting about the things that we love. Among there are of course open innovation topics, and we are trying to bring all these topics together. No, Marcel?
Yeah, exactly. And in a way, I would say this is a little bit of our own open innovation effort, right? Where we try to really create a mix between academics, industry practitioners, policymakers, and other open innovation enthusiasts, and really to bring together different ideas, insights, best practices, and diverse perspectives, and put them together to really create that bridge between academia and industry, because I think this is what makes open innovation also so interesting, and thereby on the one hand, of course, try to link or learn from the experience we have in our academic research, and on the other hand, learn from what is happening in the real world out there about all the best practices in this domain.
And for those who are tuning in for the first time, I want to invite you to listen for the first two chapters. It's true that we're still learning about how making a podcast, we're learning our way into this world. But Marcel and I have been enjoying so much, and the first two chapters are really interesting. We had Henry Chesbrough, the father of open innovation, and a great friend of both of us, and together with Anita McGahan and Miguel Arias, in the second episode we had Carlis Baldwin, Diane Finkhausen, and Hans de Jong. For me, it was a privilege to share time with all of them.
Yeah, and in addition to that, we had our so-called sections on insights from academia and industry, where we had, on the one hand, Agnieszka Radziwan and Graham Cross to guide us through the first session, and Kritika Randawa and Oana Maria Pop for the second session. And those sessions were respectively about open innovation and grand challenges, first one, and the other about innovation ecosystems.
And the best of all is that everything is among friends with this nice and friendly environment. So I hope that everyone who is listening or watching the videos enjoy as much as we do.
Yeah, and for me it's also really, a privilege to do these kinds of things. It's really, doing what we love and having these conversations is very exciting. So in that sense, I think we're ready for our third episode. And the topic here is ownership, the role of ownership in open innovation. And for me personally, I think it's actually the topic that got me initially interested in the topic of open innovation. And in fact, my very first article on the topic was called The Open Innovation Paradox. And it was about the tension between knowledge sharing and knowledge protection in R&D collaborations. And I think it's such an exciting topic because if you think about open innovation being about the purposefully managing knowledge flows across organizational boundaries, well, then the question is very much, who owns what part of that knowledge? And the role of intellectual property or IP becomes really central in that context. So that's really what triggered me initially to become interested in the topic of open innovation.
And I come from the finance and banking world. I discovered open innovation there, where, of course, the corporations are working with the service perspective, and the collaboration is mainly with the startups. So with this context, the evolution of IP, licensing, rights is really a continuous discussion. And as we began collaborating with the startups, we discussed how to shape the contracts in the balance to how to maintain the growth of the startup, but at the same time have a competitive advantage. And that also opened the discussion of what does a competitive advantage mean in this time, because of course in the service world, everyone could somehow deliver or develop something similar to you. So the discussions also evolved to ownership. And here we landed on the discussions on who owns the data that we are generating, who owns the customers, how do we distribute the revenues. And even at some point, Marcela and I engaged in a really interesting conversation about how do we distribute the results of failure. And even in the failure, there are learnings. And I feel that this topic of ownership is really deep, and it gets in my head continuously about how do we articulate and orchestrate the ownership in an open innovation collaboration. So, of course, this is a continuous topic, and I think that if we want collaborations to last, we need to set this discussion early on, because, as we say in Spanish, friendships if we want friendships to remain during long time, we need to have all the accounts and contracts really clear.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think in a way it also makes me think back a little bit of our previous episodes, actually, when we talked about grand challenges and innovation ecosystems, and those are exactly the type of context where you need to understand the role of ownership and IP in order to really tackle those kinds of issues. So in that sense, I think, there are so many important developments, like the ones we discussed before. We live in a world of, big data. We, need to understand open science, open source, all those kinds of things. And of course, these topics are then really important. So I think that makes us ready to kick off our actual conversations, right?
Right, Marcel. I think we are ready, and I'm sure that everyone will enjoy the amazing lineup of speakers that we have today. So let me begin with the first two introductions. Let me introduce you to Ingrid Williams. She is CEO and founder of DataScouts. In her own words, she's an entrepreneur, business analyst, a sparring partner, and a strategist, building businesses and guiding organizations in their digital transformation, breaking down silos, and leveraging data and company owned, generated, or has access to. So, Ingrid, welcome today.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me here. It's really nice. Looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you very much. And next, we have none other than Marcus Nordberg. He's head of resources development in a new unit called Development and Innovation, whose mandate is to create initiatives that support detector R&D and related initiatives at CERN for LHC upgrades. I'm trying to say it right, Marcus, sorry. And the LHC and other physics projects in their early stages. So the focus is on detector technology development, involving and engaging external partners such as industry and external research institutes, identifying and fostering the development and innovation potential outside the domain of particle physics. I managed. Marcos, welcome today.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Yeah, and then we also have Marianne Weile, we met back when I was still in Copenhagen in Denmark, and it was really great pleasure to work with Marianne. She was also a guest lecturer in some of the courses we were teaching, and she was very much focused on the IP related issues. She has a lot of experience with IP management, strategy, litigation, and many different things, both on the, I would say, the strategic level, but also the getting the hands dirty implementation part of the story, and that has been really interesting to discuss those things. Marianne has long experience as director and manager at Novozymes, exactly in this domain, and last couple of years also focused more on consulting and supporting also startup companies, including very interesting company, Circular Food Technology, with our common friend Karen Boykel, also very interesting initiative. So what I like about her is really the mix, of the experience in the large corporation, but also working with those startups. So welcome, Marianne. We look forward to your input here.
Thank you very much. So nice introduction, and just short. Actually, you could sum up everything I've been doing. What my thought just said, that if you want a long-term relationship, you really need to have the contract and everything in order, because that's really what it's about. So.
Exactly, yeah. And that's what we tried to bring across to some of the students we were teaching, of course. Great. Yeah, and then we have Rudi Bekkers. So Rudi is a full professor at Eindhoven University of Technology. So colleague of mine at one of the other research group at our department. And he's also senior researcher at Dialogic. He works mostly on intellectual property and especially focuses on the relation to technical standards. And apart from his academic work, what I find interesting is also doing studies for policy bodies such as the European Commission, and serves as expert witness in court cases. It's always very exciting topic, at least for outsider. But for me, Rudi is especially my former master thesis supervisor when I was still a student at this university, and maybe in that sense one of the reasons why I'm sitting here, having this conversation with all of you, because I mean that really made me also interested in the role of IP and got me interested in topics like open innovation. So still, thank you for that, Rudi, and welcome to this episode.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure to be your thesis supervisor, but that's very, very long ago by now. But it's also a pleasure to be on this talk, and I look forward to the conversation that we're going to be having.
Well, as you can see, we have a great mix of practice and academia, and in fact, with all the backgrounds that you have, we think and we know that we will engage the topic in a really from different perspectives. So I invite you to imagine that we were sitting in a nice, cozy coffee room, sharing ideas and beginning the conversation. So maybe we can begin this conversation by asking all of you, what is the role of IP or ownership in general in open innovation? And please follow the conversation as you feel it and participate as needed. And maybe to break the ice, Rudi, what can you tell us about this?
Yeah, I'll be happy to talk about it. I wanted to kick off with two items, really. First of all, is just the notion that the field of IP is very diverse. We could talk about a lot of things, but one thing I want to highlight is there's a great diversity in why people want to have IP in the first place. It can be that they want to be the only maker of a particular device or service. It can be that they want to sell licenses, exclusive or non-exclusive. But other people want it for cross-licensing and as exchange chips. Yet other people want it as a defense mechanism if they're ever attacked. Some people want it to be attractive as a partner in order for example, a startup to attract capital from venture capitalists. And yet other people see it as a signaling thing, signaling your knowledge. And that's probably not irrelevant at all in the context of open innovation, signaling what your knowledge profile is. And if I try to make these links to open innovation, I've been trying to review that literature a little bit. What I seem to see there is this big contention or disagreement in the community. On the one hand, the people that see open innovation and IP as something where people go into selective bilateral agreements. And these people already go into agreement for a variety of things, manage their expectations, monitor progress, dealing with uncertainties, financial compensation. And so for them, it's part of the package of going into that type of thing. And this is very much the traditional literature on IPR as I know it. People like Graham and Maury, and also the famous book, for example, Markets of Technology by Aurora and Gambardella, that really think about a market for technology. And then at the same time, in the world of open innovations, you seem to have a group of people that has a totally different people. We could call them the bazaar. Huh? These are the people that very much support this idea of open source development. And I think it's fair to say that Eric von Hiepel and Julian Panin, etc., is in that stream of literature. And they very much express the view that it should be open source. Anybody should have equal free access to that type of information, and it should not be selective and bilateral type of contracts. And I really see this clash coming back in a lot of literature, and also saw some interesting papers of people that try to do surveys, and maybe we get back later today in the conversation about that. But I'm very happy to learn from the other participants today as well, how do they experience this? On which side do they think companies are standing mostly, or is it half or so? So how does the practicing world really think about this academic debate on the one side, really dealing with IP in a traditional way, and on the other side, the bazaar, where people really think everybody should have equal access and none of that contractual stuff. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that overview. I think that opens the floor for a lot of conversation. I just want to start perhaps as being an entrepreneur myself. I've been in more traditional businesses before, bigger corporations, before I started my own company. And I think it's open innovation is what we're very interested in. We help a lot of corporates as well doing their open innovation, understanding the ecosystem they're active in, building and tapping into collective intelligence. And it's a very interesting topic indeed, how patents especially are used a lot by both sides to understand what is happening in that ecosystem. What technology is available, and exactly as you said, is to be found, because people are looking for the right partners to innovate. So, and it's very interesting to see how that has changed as well, where there were companies that didn't want to be found for the patents that they've been writing. There's a lot of tactics in order not to disclose who is behind it. While at the other side, especially young innovators like to be found and use that as a way of promoting themselves and providing nice insights about what they really are able to be done. So just a little bit from that side, in scanning and scouting what is happening, patents are for sure very interesting to be found or to find interesting parties. That's what we experience a lot.
Patents are really important. I'm a really big fan of patents. There's a lot of issues with it, especially enforcing them, but I think that's for another topic. But I think you couldn't have innovation going fast if you didn't have patents, because patents actually enable you to speak, because what you already, the knowledge you already have is protected, so you can speak more freely. Actually, it's already out in the public domain because it's been published through the patent. I've often, through the job I used to have, a lot of people who come with innovation and ask if you would want to acquire it or collaborate with them. And there was a very, very big difference between speaking to people who already had a patent, or at least a patent application, and them who just wanted to rely on a confidentiality agreement. Because people just dare much more, but you also dare receiving it in a completely more safe way. So it's of course it's the person who wants to tell you, but it's also the person receiving the information also means trust. I mean, I've been involved in a lot of really bad experiences where people come and tell us something they think is completely new, but we were already working on it. But of course we wouldn't tell them, in a few months we will have a product on the market, exactly what you say. So then when they see the product on the market, they might think, wow, we told you this. No, they didn't. We already had the information. So that's why the patent actually really enables you can speak more freely. And that's one thing. The other thing for me is also it gives you the framework so you can actually work with the technology, the new innovation, sharing it, using it, everything Rudi says. I mean, I look for a lot of potential partners going into who already filed something. I mean, who already have some IP on this. So it's a great tool, and I don't think we could have open innovation without.
Marcus, what do you think? How do you see things at CERN? And I know that this is a perfect melting pot also for all these kind of discussions. We've been visiting you and we talked about many aspects of these conversations. So share with us your insights.
Okay, it's really hard to kind of put it in a nutshell, but there are a lot of interesting points here. By the way, I'm not an IP expert, so don't ask me about patents. I know what they are and we do them, but this is not my specialty. So I'd like to build on what Rudi was saying, and the way to picture CERN, I think that we are a bit, it's always nice to say that we are a bit special, but so that everybody is clear where we operate in the open innovation spectrum, I'd like to kind of use a little bit of Henry's stuff. And he wrote with some lady article some 10 years ago in California Management Review, and he did a very nice job there, because he on the one hand talks about value creation and capturing, and then on the other hand bilateral versus clustering, and this is what Rudi was at least half talking about. And in that kind of continuum, it's important to understand that we at CERN, we are a scientific organization, so we are more on the value creation than the capturing side. And we are very passionate about open innovation, and as Marcel pointed out, it's coming from this open science part, because that's the way we do science. We develop new instrumentation to be able to talk to Mother Nature about the universe. And we are interested in top performance in terms of technology and not sharing profits. So this puts us in a very low, if you like, technology readiness level angle. So we are far from the market. We are not close to technology readiness levels of 8 or 9. We're probably somewhere around 3. So that's where we operate. And this question of working with industry is really fascinating, because it is exactly as Rudi said, that we are passionate about this. We are like the bazaarist, and we want to go for clustering, and we don't worry about too many details. And the IP stuff, we always declare it, well, it's owned by everybody, meaning the governments, and we make sure that the governments get nowhere close to it. So therefore, it gets completely undefined. And it's understood that the best performance is by sharing, not herding. But then it's a very difficult challenge for industry, because they obviously, when they are close to a higher technology readiness level, they need to protect the stuff. So just one analogy that what we kind of like to think at CERN and in other research centers is that, open science for us is like creating together the fishing rod, and then the fisherman / industry can then patent the hooks. So that's in a stupid nutshell.
In the reactions I just heard, I think I heard quite a lot of people saying that they did see trust in this environment of having agreements, or making explicit, having contracts, etc. At the same time, like I said, there's also this stream in the literature of the bazaar, and these are not the least, I would say, the people that have been advocating that position, and also for the sake of being the advocate of the devil, I think we should maybe look at it, because I would be really interested to understand better, are there particular circumstances in which the bazaar model is better fitting than the other model? Are there particular settings? And I know this is a conversation now with 4 panel members, but I think I'm going to ask it to Marcel. He having worked with Eric von Hippel in the past as well, I know. Maybe he can tell a little bit more what he might know about these ideas, and when this bazaar model might be the preferred model over the more organized, orchestrated model that we were just talking about. Can you say something about that, Marcel?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think the general point you're raising, or the question is really about, under which conditions does which type of model is best suited, or works best, or creates best types of results. So I think that in general is actually the right question to ask, which is already one important observation, because I think sometimes we kind of forget to ask that particular question, and we may go just with a particular mode. I mean, I'm not sure if there's one particular answer to it, but I think when I want to connect it to some of the things that I already mentioned, like Marcus, for example, mentioned the technology readiness levels. So I think, one element here is that there are maybe, different stages in the development of a technology when different types of models, may be, better suited than other ones. And that may change over, in the course of technology development. So I think, so that would be, one aspect. But I think also Ingrid talked about, also highlight the entrepreneurial perspective, which is of course another type of condition, right? So the type of organization, the size, but also things like industry and other types of characteristics, I think, play a particular role. So for me, the main point in a way is that because I think you're right, I somehow feel really connected to all of those worlds. Having been to the conferences and in conversations, discussion with people like Eric van Hippel, of course Henry Chesbrough, and which in a way I see your point, right? Because it seems like different worlds, but it's part of a broader domain, I would say. So that would be my my reaction. Then I would also be curious to hear about. Also in the practice of working with ownership or IP or open innovation in general, what some of the reflections are from the panelists in terms of how do they see some of those conditions, right? I see Marianne, you may have a reaction to that.
Yeah, because from my experience from company side, there's a really big difference on your approach on whether this is related to your core, you can say business, your core already knowledge and so on, or whether this is a new field you want to enter into. So if it's a new field you want to enter into, you don't have so much to lose, you just have a lot to learn. And then you're much more open about innovation. I mean, you don't need to own everything, you don't need to protect anything because you have a lot of things to gain. And so you're not so afraid of speaking and listening. But if it's very related to your core business and where you make your income, and then you it's much more difficult to put it out in the open space for everybody. I mean, I've seen companies saying, "Oh, we have the strategy, we put our patents out, everybody can work there." And I have to see all the patents I saw from the people in our field put it out. It was probably patents they would never use themselves. I mean, it wasn't. They didn't put anything out there that you would, at least not, in my experience, that would come really close to your core business, because you don't dare to, because it's so. I mean, I've been very much involved in people stealing technology and copying, in a not allowed way, and it matters a lot to your income. So it really depends on where you are in your own development phase. Does that make sense to you guys? Or?
Yeah, I think Marianne does.
Yeah, but
that does make a lot of
I
sense.
would add is, if in your core business, then you say, I don't dare to speak with anybody, I don't dare to kind of innovate with all the rest of the world, then you're also going to lose. Because then you're not, I mean, even though you might have a really huge amount of your own scientists, I mean, the likelihood that they're going to do the very best innovation for the next many years is not very high. You need to get the information in. And that's where you then, coming back to IP is the framework to make that happen. And you need to find, as a company, the right balance of demanding that you want to own everything and actually allowing for other people to, of course, have some of the value or access to the new innovation. And that, I think the winners, in my view, again, are the companies who actually are very good at finding that balance. Maybe just to add on that, I mean, I've been also negotiating with a lot of large companies myself that didn't have that balance. And I mean, I would never go back and offer them something new, because I just know it would be too much work to convince them to find a good way forward for everybody, because everybody has to be getting something out of it if you need to innovate together. Can't just be one.
Yeah, I think that.
So one other element, I think it hasn't been mentioned yet, but in terms of what are the contexts under which one model is working and the other is the whole incentive structure, because that seems to very much emphasize in the open source world and even in the open hardware world. Is there a kind of incentive model that people can live from that allow them to follow that model? But basically the incentives come from other way, come from personal reputation, comes perhaps from software services that come on top of the basic platform they are from, or any other model that is stable over a longer amount of time can allow them to operate in such a mode. And that might be a strong explanation as well, that in certain worlds, certain models work or not. The other thing that I find kind of interesting is that in the open source model world, and the emphasis is really on copyright, or what they call copyleft, using the copyright mechanism by creating a set of rules when somebody has access and what they need to comply to. For example, that they also need to make the derivative product available on the same license. This is all nice, but actually we've seen a fair amount of patent clashes there as well. I think one famous example is Samsung, who implemented the Android software in his phone, and then to find out people were knocking on their door saying, wait a moment, you're infringing our patents. And Samsung was like, no, I'm using Open Android. And then these people said, yeah, but that doesn't mean you cannot infringe our patents. Somebody wrote a code that uses our patent but never asked for permission. So there's a bit of a clash there as well, I think, in the type of intellectual property, and there's been a lot of misunderstanding. I think this has improved over the last few years, but a couple of years ago, there was kind of a big misunderstanding as well what open source was and what the consequences were. Even the recent report of the European Commission on this reveals it's even much more complex than we thought it was, this relationship. Something that's certainly much more work into understanding it, I would say.
If I heard you correct, you were also asking, is there one good model to actually have an open source? And again, I think my experience has been you should be open for different models, because what you really need to explore upfront is what makes everybody happy. And you can't always, sometimes you guess, and you guess wrong. Sometimes, a company, I think it's money, but often it's not. It might be something else. It might be that you are very interested in a very little area, and they're interested in completely different areas. So you can use the same technologies in two different fields. So my experience is
Marianne and I,
take the time and sit down and explore.
Marianne and I can only agree with that. Yes, because that's exactly what I experienced in the beginning. I always thought it was very hard as a small startup to talk with a corporate, and in order to agree like what was my background and my part. But then I noticed when you really go into that conversation and you're very upfront and clear on who you are, what you have to offer, what your background is, and like what the path is you're going to do together, what everybody is contributing and what people want to do, or organizations with the outcome, you get into a very positive and a collaborative organization, or collaboration in the end. And that's what I learned, is to really go into that conversation, to be very clear about who you are, where you want to go as a startup, what you want to achieve. You don't want to take over their business, you're too small, but you have a very specific thing you want to achieve. And that's what I learned, that exactly that conversation, having that conversation, how difficult it is. Try to have a Spock there that understands you as an entrepreneur, not just have a legal person on the other side, but really somebody who understands and can help you in that process. That has helped me a lot to move ahead and have very positive collaboration with very large organizations, because in the end, you give them something they don't have, and you learn a lot in that process as well. So the more that clarity is there, where you want to go, what you can mean for each other, and where it ends as well, helps a lot to do a good project together.
But this seems to be really about management of expectations,
Yes.
and understanding each other, instead of leaving this implicit basically, and think that the other knows what you mean, but never have spoken it out, because that might be the source of a lot of problems, that people think the other side kind of understands what their intention was and what the expectations are, but never making it explicit. And IP might help to have this conversation a little bit more open. Because one thing Marianne said, and I was happy to hear that, I want to emphasize that again, by choosing for formal IP, at least in contrast to a trade secret, it is already getting disclosed as knowledge. And this is a main misunderstanding I see in quite a lot of the literature. I went through a couple of papers through today, and they were all talking about, things about knowledge diffusion and being hindering. But once you apply for an IP, the knowledge is diffused. The patent application is going to be published in 18 months. Yeah. Everybody can read that, build up invent around it, etc. So that dissemination is already happening. The question is about the permission to use it. And there might be the discussion. That's part of agreements that you enter into, and you make choices, what you want to do or not.
Yeah, and really, there is... Yeah, I was just wondering, just one step further, is that I think we sometimes forget what, we live in a very transparent world. It's not only what is in a patent, it's what's on your website, it's what in your vacancies, it's in every pitch you do. There is so much information that is available already outside there. As we're a big data and an AI company, we're using a lot of that data that is out there. And I think that people really underestimate how much knowledge is available out there already. And sometimes I think we spend a lot of time in negotiating and discussing things while there is already a lot of information that is shared and available. What is, of course, not when you're very early stage working on some breakthrough innovations,
Now, one thing I've been wondering about and would like to ask this panel, in my field, people that research IP also have a very critical view towards, is our IP system working? What are the side effects? There's an endless discussion on that. And without starting by saying what I think or what the things are there particular things in the open innovation world where I see really issues with the patent system and desires of changes or fundamental problems that particularly from their angle they are experiencing? Can you say something, in a more critical sense about the IP system, what is bothering you in the way you do your work?
Do you want me to do it, maybe? Or Ingrid or Marcus, do you have a point of view on that?
No, go ahead, Marianne.
No, so I actually think the system itself, applying and all of that, that is a pretty good system, I think. I think the whole idea that it's very cheap when you submit your patent application, it becomes more expensive over the years, so you only keep it alive if it really creates value for you. I mean, that's also the whole system. You don't have a patent for the rest of your life if you don't keep paying for it, and it becomes more and more expensive. So I think that's also a smart thing from society, not having a hinder for innovation if it's not being put to use. But I think the whole thing about enforcing is really difficult. So if someone infringes your patent application, it's extremely expensive. And I mean, I've been involved in a number of patent litigations in the US. It's crazy. China, cheaper, but really difficult. So it's just, and if I was a, English startup like you, most people who were infringing your IP would know that you could not go into the fight. So, you would be much more likely of settling. And I think that's a fraud with the system. I know there have been kind of tried to make different insurances and so on, but I'm not sure. I haven't seen it really work, or it would still for startup company be really expensive to insure. And I don't know how we could do that system better, but it's too expensive and too difficult for smaller companies to do.
For sure.
And that's one of the reasons we have been talking at the time, because I thought, it still is a big value for companies that have the muscles to use them. But then I think over the years, what I thought about, because instead of patents, you can also just have confidentiality agreements, for example. That's one way you can enable a discussion. And I used to have my own company, and I was afraid talking to larger companies, thinking they would cheat me and all of that. But what I learned from actually working in a large company, it would be crazy if you cheated somebody, because you are so reliant upon people who want to come to you and collaborate with you and give talk to you about your newest innovation. And if there are rumors that you cheat people, then that's dead. And you know, again, I can point out a few very large companies that have a hard time with innovation because I don't think it's the company itself that made the decision, but it becomes a culture where they think, oh, anybody who, you know, just talking with them are happy to talk with them, and they don't see it from the other point of view. And that I'm really happy, Ingrid, that you said that's actually your experience, because that's what it should be. And that's the right thing for society if we want to think about the ecosystem, that we have the startups that do things most larger companies won't do at that stage. So I think it's really nice that many people are good at that, or many companies are good at that.
Yeah, and it's what you say is that we're, you know, especially we're in software, so it's very hard as well to really make that very clear and to put that in a pattern or whatever. And that what I learned is that in the end, as a startup, we're fast. That is really what makes us different. So the more we can learn in collaboration with other partners, we're clear what our background is and where we want to go. The faster we are, the more access we have to success. That's at least what I learned. So in the beginning, I had that same feeling, what you said, Marianne, is like, oh, they're just listening to me in order to take my idea and run off with it. But honestly, I learned very fast that they don't have the speed to do that, like the way that we can learn. And so the more I started talking with people and validating my idea and knew where I had to go, the faster we were. And I think today, honestly, I don't mind so much anymore to talk about what we are and who we are, because I know what we have. So it's very, I'm always so amazed when people tell others or coaches, say, don't talk about what you're doing, keep it secret. And I think that's not a way to innovate. If you don't talk, if you don't validate, you're not sure you're going into the right direction. So yeah, I'm rather most probably on the other side to say, really try to make speed and try to validate as quick as you can.
I think we're reaching like the final part of this section. So I invite each of you to round up with a conclusion and a final thoughts as you wish. I saw that Marcus was nodding a lot over Ingrid's last comment. I don't know if you want to begin, Marcus.
I had difficulty hearing you, Marisol, but you're asking us to make short roundup. Is that what you're asking? Okay. I find the discussion very interesting. As I said, I'm not so much on the IP side, but I do recognize a lot of the points that have been made and very much appreciate all of your comments. And I can't offer any sort of magic bullet, but I do like a lot of the observations that Rudi has been making, and in particular the role of the patterns, which really is, it's true, it's a permission to use. And one of the key questions maybe for the future that we've been thinking about in the CERN attract ecosystem concept is that whether we could use technologies like blockchain or something like that. No, I'm not saying it's necessarily blockchain, but something like that, where the identity of the author would be secured. And this we hope that could actually also help in our discussions with industry, that the sharing of the question of IP could be done in some new, clever way, which would recognize the ownership, let's say the originality of where the invention is coming. Now, our community is very big. We have 11,000 people. This is another issue, how to get 11,000 people in a patent. So that for that reason also is practically, well, we think impossible. But using some new technologies that we are thinking about could be something that could turn out to be useful. So. Thank you.
I don't know, Ingrid, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I found it a very interesting discussion to hear all these issues. I think for me, believing a lot that competitive thinking is a little bit old-fashioned and thinking in ecosystems is a real way forward in order to really make transition and change really happen. I can only invite and share my idea that the more we talk with each other, the more we try to collaborate, build and tap into collective intelligence, that is really the only way forward. And I agree with Marcus, if we can find a way of making, this ownership more clear who has been part of it and make that available in an open way, that would really make sense.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. Marianne?
Marcus, it's interesting you said you were not an IP person, and neither am I. But I think about it, that's true. I talked a lot about it. So my main job was creating partnerships. But actually IP becomes such a big part of it. I would say I more or less got to know a lot of IP because I couldn't see how you could set up partnerships being a large side company without the IP. I think one of the things I really took away from this that's more clear to me, that's the whole idea that you need to have a conversation up front. And back to what Marisol also said, you needed to have all the agreements in place in order to have a long-term relationship. And I think that's what I tried to say so many times. And you need to sit down and have all the difficult conversations, because once you have agreed, if this and that happened, if you do this and then we do this, then it's so much easier to collaborate afterwards, because then you have set your expectations. I think that's the way forward.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Thank you very much, Marianne. And Rudy?
Yes, so for me as an academic, one of the questions that always comes to me is like, how close do we really understand reality and the real world around us? We have lots of academic debates, and the one we were just mentioning here in the debate in open innovation about these two models, the cathedral and the bazaar, and the big disagreement between these communities. What sense of reality is there? And it's nice to see that some of the more recent survey-based studies, there's one of John Hagedorn of Merit, Maastricht University, is actually pretty close to the arguments I've been hearing by people today. So that gives me some trust, at least in science, that some people do good work and do have a reasonably good understanding. It also feels kind of comforting that I hear here that the way people think about being able to reach agreement and understanding even between a bigger and a smaller entity still works quite okay. Of course, from the outside, often we see only the conflicts and when things goes wrong, and it's also the case when I act in court cases. You see when things massively derailed, and then you get this incredible, insane big cases and conflicts, etc. But we also have to realize that in most fields, these are the exceptions, not the rule. Of course, there are fields that are extremely litigious, and of course, there are patent assertion entities whose whole business model is built around court cases. But still, what we have to value, I think, that in most areas, at least, these are the exceptions and not the rule. And normally, people are able, to behave well, and that's a reassuring thought in a way, I would say.
That's true. Well, I think this has been really an exceptional conversation, and I like even more now the mix of speakers that we got, because we have so many different perspectives: the startup perspective, the science perspective with this collaborative and generation of ideas that Marcus represents, and the academic point of view, and what Marianne is working in the real relationship. So for me, the big conclusions about trust and communication are key. At the end, we come again to human values, Marcel.
No, exactly, and it's very interesting to also see the different cross relationship between the different episodes that we are now recording. Recurrent issues like working in ecosystems. The unit of analysis is changing, and I really also like the fact of how, in a way, when Rudy tries to talk about these different models, from my point of view, it's also how within open innovation we should look at how can we understand those different conditions, and how does it all, what are the implications for actual organizations that try to manage all these knowledge flows, and how can you tap into that on the one hand, and of course on the other hand, what does it mean for the larger range of technology developments, from basic science up to ultimate commercialization. So, a little bit overwhelming, but extremely interesting, of course. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for being with us today and for having this amazing conversation. And I think we're ready to move to the next section. Do you agree?
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very, very much, everyone. As you know, one of the objectives for us is to bring together academia and industry, bring in specific perspectives, and that's why we like to add these sections about insights. And of course, I'm a practitioner, and for me, really, the academic world is kind of an aspirational, and I'm always trying to learn. That's why, for me, it's really great to invite to this next section about academia insights. And today, we are traveling hand by hand with one of the best persons to speak about this. Let me welcome Joanna Stefan. Joanna, thank you very much for joining today. You are Assistant Professor of Innovation Management at Mälardalen University in Sweden. As you can see today, we have people in all the corners of the world. Welcome today, and hello all the way to Sweden.
Thank you, Marcel. Hello, and thank you both to you and Marcel for inviting me here today. It's a pleasure, and it was very interesting to listen to the panel. I agree also from our previous research that a lot of the IP issues discussions come down to human values and to trust. So the individual level, as we will see in the academic insights today, is particularly important. So I will start with a short background on this topic, and then we'll move forward to themes in current research, but also to open questions that are raised by recent studies. So the topic of IP ownership in open innovation is often construed more recently in terms of the paradox of openness, which was also mentioned in the previous episodes of the WOIConversations. I think we all know that this paradox highlights the balance between creating and capturing value. And we have a couple of seminal studies in recent years that have sparked really great and interesting conversations, academic conversations about IP ownership. And one of those is Bekkers, 2011, from the European Journal of Innovation Management, introducing the paradox of openness. And then we have Larsen and Salter in 2014 in research policy. And of course, a lot of other great scholars have contributed to these conversations. Just to name a few, we think about the work of David Thies on operability, the work of Alexi Henkel and colleagues on selective revealing and IP modularity, the work of Zobel and Hagedorn on the role of boundaries for governance in open innovation, and also the work of Bekkers, Blind and colleagues on standards and IP. And as mentioned, these are just a few examples. There's a lot more. And I hope I will be able to capture your interest today with some of the recent studies. But just a warning that there is too little time to explore this whole topic. As was mentioned before, this is very broad. So I have highlighted a few themes, and I hope that we can build on these. So one of the themes that is really important, but also not so much researched in recent academic research, is that of digital technologies and Industry 4.0 in relation to IP. And we see this in a recent review in Technovation published this year by Obradovich and colleagues. And they signal this sort of lack of research. But on the positive side, we see a lot of different studies published in the past couple of years that tackle topics around IP and digitalization. So I will just enumerate a few. For instance, in California Management Review, we saw the article that was published this year by Yang Chesborough and Hermelina Laukanen, who explore how open innovation can be leveraged for general purpose technologies in order to speed up appropriation and increase the benefits. Then we have another article in long range planning also published this year by Karhu and Ritalan, who explore the opportunistic platform entry strategies. We also have an article from last year in Science and Public Policy, which highlights this tension or conflict between privacy and transparency, which are sort of emphasized by GDPR on one hand and IPRs on the other hand. And this is authored by Minson, Rajam, and Bowers. And then there's a couple of articles in Research Policy published this year, which I think touch upon the discussion in the panel as well about the bazaar versus the protectiveness and appropriation. One of them is by Dallander and colleagues, and they touch upon the role of IPRs for open source software and hardware. And the other is written by Gold and touches upon the role of IPRs for open science partnerships. So I think we're seeing that these two worlds are starting to kind of merge, and there's more of a gray area than a black and white area. So I hope in the future we will see much more research on this. But all in all, just to summarize this emerging theme, I think it's clear that digital technologies and new regulations to process data are going to change the way we view IP and also the way we enforce IP rights. But the question remains how this will change. Another emerging theme in academic research on open innovation and IP is openness dynamics. So when to close the innovation process, when to open it up. This is an issue that is not so much explored, well, not enough as it should receive attention, but it has been signaled already in recent articles by Appelard and Chesborough in Long Range Planning in 2017, and also by Granstrand and Holgersson in 2014 in Research Technology Management. And this issue of openness dynamics also becomes a lot more salient in innovation ecosystems that address grand challenges. Because on one hand, we need open innovation to address societal challenges, but on the other hand, we also need to be clear, as mentioned before by the panel, about the contracts and the ownership. In a recent study in Technovation this year by De Silva and colleagues, they urge for policy instruments to manage these kinds of tensions in innovation ecosystems. And to address a bit, I think, one of the issues that was discussed about by the panel, I think it would be very interesting to look at the pandemic situation, because that was a particularly urgent societal challenge. And we see there in articles by Dallander and Wallin in 2020 in Harvard Business Review, but also in the special issue in R&D Management on COVID pandemic, that there is, the scales are tilting towards co-creation and openness, and not so much towards protectiveness in this kinds of specific context. And now moving further from the themes, I'd like to also just mention a few levels of analysis that have been little research in the past, but in the recent years we're seeing more and more research on those, and they are very important to comprehending the paradox of openness. One is the project level and the other is the individual level. And on the project level we see a couple of special issues in industrial management, marketing, and also in International Journal of Project Management. And many of the papers in the special issues tackle the IP issues in open innovation. And also at the individual level, there's recent papers, for instance, by Fogge et al. In 2019 in Research Policy that highlight potential psychological consequences. So this is because of the paradox of openness. So this is an area to explore further. So thank you so much. That's all for me. I hope this inspired you to read more studies and to research more about this topic.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Certainly, I think we are eager to learn more about this, and also we found many interesting open questions that new researchers and, of course, the practice can dig into. No? Thank you very much. Back to you, Marcel.
Yeah, thank you so much, and also thank to Joanna for this really very comprehensive overview, both of existing research and indeed important topics for the future. And we start to see how it is all connecting. After these, very interesting academic insights, we're now moving to the section on industry insights. And, here we're interested in learning about, real cases, what practitioners are, experiencing all around the world. And for this today, we've invited Alberto Tornero, who's a partner at PwC and mainly in charge of high growth company area, and very much in his daily business works with IP and data management and those kinds of topics. So I think a perfect person to reflect a little bit on this. So Alberto, maybe you can say a little bit more about your background and guide us through your own insights from an industry point of view on this topic.
Okay, thank you very much, Marcel and everybody. It was so interesting, all the things that we have talked about. So, I'm working now since 2013. I'm leading the high growth potential companies area in PwC Spain, and we work with scale-ups and startups, and we work with big corporates to work with them what is open innovation. So I have the two hats. Just one time, sometimes I'm on one side, and sometimes I'm on the other side. And my former, I don't know when. So now, I'm a lawyer, and my ground is IP. So I have that kind of mixture, so we can talk about whatever you want. So this is my background.
Great, yeah. No, but I think especially with that background, I'm really curious to hear from you. How you react to what our panelists have been discussing. What are the aspects that you see as being relevant, and especially what are some of the examples that you have experienced in your own work or in general in terms of how issues of ownership in open innovation have been addressed and implemented throughout different businesses and other types of organizations.
Okay, Marcel. First of all, I'm very glad that the third chapter of open innovation is about property. So it's a very good step for the people who have been talking about intellectual property for 20 years. The third is talking about IP, but not IP, ownership, what is different, it's the same. It's a very good news, because 10 or 15 years ago, talking about IP and business was like a freaky group, you know what I mean? That we were talking about how important is that? And the people said, I don't know, the important is the code. Now it's a very, very good news. I'm not going to talk about IP because you have talked about the panelists, Joanna, it was fantastic. So I would like to see a little wider, talk about a little wider perspective of the ownership, what is the ownership of the whole project of open innovation. So, and when you're talking on the industry side, on the big corporates, for example, side, you have to think that ownership is more than the IP. And I will share with you the three lines that when we talk about ownership in open innovation. We talk about the product, we talk about the service on the solution that a startup could bring, and we talk about the ownership of the initiative of the big corporate. You know what I mean? Of the initiative by means the company is dealing and is in the market working with the third parties, these small parties, what should be, or maybe startups and whatever. So this is not only the IP, but the whole concept for us, at least in PwC here. the areas we have to talk when we talk about ownership and open innovation. Regarding the product, it's quite simple. Product is absolutely related to IP. So if you want to have the product itself, if you want to have you have to grant, or you have to grant licenses, you have to do whatever. In the case, the intellectual property is well protected in the beginning in case of these startups, because it happens a lot of time when we talk with the other side, with the startups. One of the main things we ask is, have you protected all your, not only the IP, because sometimes for them IP is a kind of legal issue. Have you protected your assets, your intangible assets? But we're not talking about marks or whatever. We're talking about the core of your business. So when we talk about the ownership of the product, we have to talk about intellectual property. But many times big corporates are very interested in the service, in what you do, in the solutions that the startup is granting. And then you have to think in talking about human values, talking about expectation. It's quite important to understand that if you want the service, if you want the solution, you have to go further, and you have to have other instruments, sometimes legal instruments, apart from the IP. That could be, of course, acquisition of companies. That could be exclusivity agreements. You know what I mean? For the first 3 years, you will have an exclusivity on any kind of services or whatever that will make profitable for the big corporate, to get into this open innovation, because all of us are very conscious on the importance of open innovation, but it is not outside of here. Sometimes it's quite difficult to move, not because of, not when you want the company to do things just to be in the media. When you want them to take this and to put deeply in their corporation, it is not so easy sometimes. So you have to show them what are they going to get, and how are you going to state or to design not only the contracts, the strategy to get what they want. So if you're talking about product, it would be IP. If you're talking about services, you would be the main things that you talk about would be acquisitions. Sometimes talking about the teams. No, of course you cannot buy a team, but you have to think in that on how to try to state or how to design this process to get what they want. For example, you will hire them, you will integrate them, because this is another kind of ownership of the things that you will that the big corporate will want to get into when they start this open innovation strategy. And the third one is the ownership of the initiative itself. For example, if we are talking about an accelerator, it's one of the main ways that a big corporate will get into the open innovation. It's quite important to have your own strategy on who will be your partners. Because sometimes, and maybe Marisol will know a lot of this, sometimes if you have a partner that is in your footprint, or can your mark and your label will be in conflict, you will have a problem with all the open innovation strategy. So if we talk about ownership and open innovation and industry, I will say, just to summarize, I will say, think in these 3 areas, and think in the product, but think in the service, on the solution, in the whole solution, on each part of the solution, and think in the ownership of the initiative itself, of where you are creating. And just to finish, I would like to say something. Ownership is not a legal issue. It is a business issue. For me, it's quite important when I'm teaching. I'm teacher in university here in Spain. I always say it is not a matter of legal issue. It's a matter of business. It's a matter of strategy. If we were talking about real estate, nobody will ask about the property and the ownership. They know the house you own the house, or you don't know, or you don't own the house. So please, let us try to put the ownership on the business ground, and when you have to go deeper and you need a specialized people who know a lot of IP, and technical people, legal technical people, please go there. But IP ownership on intangible assets is not a matter of law. It should be, under my opinion, on the ground of business. So thank you very much. I have plenty of things to talk about, but I have my time, and I hope. No, but yeah,
thank you so much. I think in a way you also really managed to connect some of the dots, of the conversation that has unfolded, in this episode. So I think that's really great in itself. Indeed, I think it's interesting because the topic is really also a touching point of different disciplines as well, right? So is it a legal issue? Is it a business issue? I think that's a very good reflection in itself. So yeah, thank you very much for that. Actually, remember when Rudy may remember when I was doing this master thesis, back in the day, won't mention the date. Actually, I think we realized that when we were interested in this topic and I wanted to talk to some of these companies, they were really hesitant to talk about this at that point in time. It's a little while ago, right? In a way, the topic was too good and too sensitive somehow. This is also why it took quite some year to get the paper published that I mentioned. But it's also because we could put the open innovation label on it. So I think my conclusion a little bit is also that I think we now live in a time where we have developed on the industry side, on the academic side. And from my point of view, I hope that open innovation is a concept and a framework that allows to connect some of the different fields, different disciplines, different units of analysis, as Ioana also mentioned. So I think in a way, that's what I find really exciting. One of the many things that I personally take away from today's episode. So yeah, thank you again for that. And what do you think, Marisol? I think we covered a lot of ground, a little bit overwhelming, but yeah, what do you think?
I think we were expecting that. While we were preparing, Marisol, we knew that this was a really deep and transversal topic. And I think, in a way, we love the challenge of opening these specific kind of maybe kind of worms. But really, I think interesting that we touch the technical side, but also the scientific side, for example, and the human side and the business side of it, because at the end, everything is involved in this. I really enjoyed the insights and the panel. I need to ask if you convinced Ioana of mentioning some of your papers, Marcel.
No, I have nothing to do with that, but it made me realize that, like I think Marianne and Marcus said, they're not really about IP, but they do it all the time in a way. And for me, it's kind of the same because I don't see myself as an IP scholar, but then Ioana made me realize that, well, there are quite a few of these things popping up that are actually quite related. So I think that's super interesting. So
it was not prearranged, everybody. This is a true summary. And well, we are now officially ending our third chapter. I think a lot with my heart, all of the adventurers that are here today with us, because we know this is an adventure. We are learning and we are growing. Well, and that's it for today. Remember that you will be able to listen to the podcast in Spotify and iTunes and wherever you listen to your podcasts, and that we will have the YouTube video. You will be able to see us in YouTube, and we will include the reference to all the cases that Ioana explained in her presentation, and any other reference for interesting material that we mentioned today. And if you like today's conversation, I really advise you to listen to the first two ones because they were really nice.
Yeah, I agree with that, of course, and I also like really how these different topics are getting connected. So I think that's great. But to close, I mainly want to thank our panelists for today. So big thanks to Ingrid, Marianne, Marcus, and Rudy for really very interesting session. Of course, also special thanks to our Insight Section adventurers, as Marcel calls them, Ioana and Alberto. I think your insight has been really interesting to connect some of the dots. Also, big thanks to our WOIC team, and in this context in particular, Jacob, Fernando, and Atabiko are also doing a great work in making all of this happen and published and so on. So that's really great. And finally, thanks of course to all of you who are following these conversations. We hope you like it, and we hope to see you next time. So goodbye, everyone.
Thank you very much.